Let's say one day you wake up with a gazillion dollars in your bank account. You naturally go out to spend a few hundreds of thousands on brand new cars, bottles of champagne in nightclubs and fancy restaurants. But you eventually get bored and decide on your next top G purchase, a private jet. Not a Gulfstream, you're not that rich. A pre-owned light jet, like Citation CJ3 Plus. 4 seats, range of about 2,000 miles, good for Aspen trips and Florida weekends. Dealers say it's a buyer's market. You walk onto the tarmac, look at the plane, shake a hand, and you own a private jet. Congratulations, you now have the least interesting part of the problem solved. Because here's what nobody tells you about owning a private jet. The purchase price is a deposit. The real cost is a subscription you can't cancel. And here's the thing about that subscription. It starts the moment you sign before the engines have ever turned over. Let me show you the spreadsheet they don't give you at the sales center. Hangar, $3,000 to $10,000 a month depending on your airport. Insurance, $50,000 to $200,000 a year. You need a pilot, that's $120,000 to $250,000 in salary plus benefits. Recurrent training for that pilot every 6 months, another 20 to 40 grand. And that's before maintenance, which brings us to the engine. A Citation CJ3 Plus has 2 engines. Each one has a life limit, a certain number of hours before it must be overhauled. An overhaul costs $400,000 to $600,000 per engine. Per engine. The machine strapped to the side of your plane is worth more than most people's houses. And it needs a full rebuild every few thousand hours. Now here's the trick. You don't pay the overhaul cost all at once. You pay it in increments, engine reserves, calculated per flight hour. So every time you fly, your plane is quietly accruing debt to its own future. $150 to $300 per hour per engine. You can't skip it. You can't negotiate it. You can only defer it, which means you're just borrowing from your future self. Which means the operating cost on that Citation CJ3 Plus, all in, fixed and variable, runs about $1,800 to $2,200 per hour. If you fly 200 hours a year, that's $440,000 in annual operating costs alone. Before you've paid a dollar toward the $5 million you spent to acquire it. A charter company would rent you the exact same plane for $2,500 to $3,500 an hour, which means at 200 hours you're paying more to own it than you would to rent it. So why would anyone do this? Enter Richard Santulli. In 1986, Santulli was running a helicopter leasing company when he had an insight that made him a billionaire. What if people didn't buy a whole jet? What if they bought a fraction of one? The math was beautiful. You buy a 1/16th share of a jet, $400,000 down. You pay $13,000 a month in management fees. And then you pay $2,800 for every hour you actually fly. Plus another $2,000 an hour if the plane has to reposition to pick you up. It costs more than charter. It gives you less flexibility than whole ownership. It's a worse deal on every measurable dimension. And it made Santulli so rich that Warren Buffett bought his company for $725 million. Which brings us to Wheels Up. In 2023, the second biggest name in private aviation membership nearly collapsed. $500 million in losses, a stock price that dropped 97% from its peak, and a rescue deal that wiped out most of its investors. The problem? They sold memberships cheaper than the flights cost to operate, and hoped volume would save them. It didn't. So NetJets created a product that's mathematically worse than the alternatives. Wheels Up created one that was mathematically impossible. And both of them are billion-dollar companies. Aviation is a strange business. But here's the darkest part of private jet economics, and it's the one that nobody in a sales center will ever explain to you. The real reason people buy private jets is not about speed. It's not about luxury, it's about the tax code. Section 179 of the Internal Revenue Code lets businesses deduct up to $1.22 million of qualifying equipment in the year it's placed in service. Then bonus depreciation lets them write off another 80% of the remaining value. In 2025, that's 80% of the purchase price, deductible in year 1. Do the math. A company buys a $6 million jet. They deduct roughly $4.8 million in year 1. If they're paying the corporate tax rate of 21%, that's about $1 million they don't send to the IRS. The jet itself, it's a side effect. The actual product is a tax shield, which explains the single most misunderstood number in business aviation: 14,857 private jets in the United States, and roughly 14,000 of them are owned by businesses, not billionaires, companies. And the reason isn't transportation, it's accounting. Now, here's the problem with that strategy. Bonus depreciation is phasing down 20% per year every year through 2027. Next year, it drops to 60%, then 40, then 20, then 0, which means the tax math that drives 80% of private jet purchases is evaporating. And with it, the second-hand market. Because every jet bought under bonus depreciation eventually hits the pre-owned market, and the buyer pool shrinks when the tax benefit shrinks. This is the hidden clock on the entire industry. So what's the right answer? Under 50 hours a year, charter. Don't think about owning. Use Avinode, book a jet when you need it, pay the broker their commission, and move on. 50 to 200 hours. Fractional jet ownership. You'll overpay per hour, but you won't have to think about engines or hangars or pilot training. You're buying convenience, and at this utilization, convenience is the only thing that makes sense. Above 200 hours, whole ownership. But only if you have a business that needs the Section 179 deduction. Because without the tax benefit, the math doesn't work. And that's not a coincidence. The tax code was written this way on purpose. Which brings us back to the $5 million you had at the start of this video. The jet you were going to buy, that citation CJ3+, it costs somewhere around $2 million to operate over 5 years. Depreciation eats another $1.5 million. The purchase price was $5. Total cost over half a decade. Roughly $8 million for something you'll fly maybe 200 hours a year. But here's what nobody tells you. That $8 million isn't what you pay. It's what you decide to trade. For the people who actually buy these things, the trade makes sense because the alternative, paying taxes, costs more. And that's the uncomfortable truth about private jets. The people who own them aren't necessarily richer than you. They just have better accountants. If you want the real version of how expensive things actually work, drop a like and hit subscribe. And if you've got a specific jet in your future, citation Gulfstream, doesn't matter, drop it in the comments. I want to hear which spreadsheet killer you're looking at.